Now, as you know, if you've been listening to any comments by the boneheads in the mainstream media recently, as in the last couple months, 3 months even, you should be staying away from gold and silver. We told you it was a bad idea. Prices have been smashed. You should have never done this. You should have been investing in the markets, stock market instead. Now that's interesting because the same massive countries, large-sized countries, China, India, Russia, have been continually stockpiling gold and silver. They don't seem to understand our mainstream media. What's wrong with these people? Why are they doing this? And do you find it highly suspicious that one of the world's largest explosions, non-nuclear explosions, took place immediately after China says we're devaluing the dollar, their currency, the yuan. And then the next day we're going to devalue it some more. 3 days in a row they did a devaluation, which upset America. And then all of a sudden there's this huge explosion on one of their port cities, causing unbelievable amounts of damage. Coincidence. So back on the gold page, let me just get right to the title. Courtesy, once again, Zero Hedge. Billionaire Stanley Miller, almost looks like drunken, but it's an N-E, not an E-N. Miller loads up on gold, makes it his largest position for the first time ever. Stanley, what are you doing? Don't you listen to the mainstream media? Haven't they proven that gold and silver, with the prices recently, you should not be owning these things? Stanley, what are you doing, a billionaire? Come on. Unless Stanley knows better. Unless Stanley's a billionaire for a reason. Over the past several years, one of the biggest critics of the Fed's ruinous monetary policy has been billionaire investor Stanley, yeah, it is drunken. They spelled it wrong in the title. And not Drucken. Stanley Druckenmiller, one of the biggest critics of the Fed's ruinous monetary policy, who in 2010 announced he would be shutting down his legendary company that dealt with capital management and convert it to a family office. Yet despite his constant drumbeat of warnings that the period of zero interest rates for the banks, quantitative easing, printing of money will end in tears, he had yet to put money where his mouth was, aside for a brief period in mid-2012 when he bought a lot of gold GLD calls, only to unwind them almost instantly. This ended on June 30th when, following Friday's filing by their family office, we learned that as of the end of Q2, the largest position for Stanley Druckenmiller was none other than gold. Except Stanley, you didn't do it right. You didn't do it right. Ready for this? He's still making a point investing in gold, but he didn't invest in gold the right way. So we learned that in end of Q2, the largest position for Stanley Druckenmiller was none other than gold, following the purchase of 2.9 million ounces. No, 2.9 million ounce. No, that word doesn't start with ounce. Let me try that again. 2.9 million shares of the GLD ETF. In other words, as of this moment, gold amounts to over 20%. It amounts to over 20% of his total holdings. It's a huge investment to put in one little area. And again, it's GLD. But if the price of gold isn't going to be going up, nobody would invest in GLD. You don't invest in something that you foresee going down. You wait till it goes down, then invest if you think it's going to go back up. So wait a minute, maybe gold is at the bottom, maybe silver is at the bottom, and the smart money's now moving into it one way or the other. In his case, he's using GLD ETFs. At the same time, that's 2 million shares, or 2 million ounces, technically speaking, of gold. When you have that kind of money, where does one store? You know, imagine if old Stanley's watching JSNIP 4 videos. If you don't hold it, you don't own it, Stanley. Well, I got shares. Right. And everyone else probably has a secret hiding spot or a safe or something that they're holding it in, because they do own it. Well, could you imagine Stanley listening to me telling people get a safe or this and that and put it in? I can see him raising his hand through the video screen. Stanley, go ahead. I've got 2.9 million ounces I need to buy. What the hell kind of safe do you think I could buy to store that? Stanley, you bring a good point. Which means you need to store it in a safe facility that stores gold for people. And I can't really recommend anybody, because they tend to tell you it's allocated, we won't touch it, you have the only key, and you don't, and they do take it, and they do sell it off and rent it, basically lease it to the gold banks. And then when you come back to get it, they don't have it, and then they try to get it back, and with an amount of 2.9 million ounces, you may never get that back. But they'll give you the paper equivalent at the time, or just give you your money back somehow or whatever. Then you're gonna file a lawsuit, and you know. In a world in which starved for ideas alpha chasers do anything and everything that billionaires report they did a month and a half ago, we wonder if this marks the end of the relentless liquidation in the GLD, which recently hit a multi-year low, as a result driving the price of paper gold to multi-year lows, even as physical demand has approached record levels. So with Druckenmiller now back, and you know why I keep saying Druckenmiller? I got a feeling he's drunk when he decided to use GLD paper instead of the real thing. Maybe that's why my subconscious mind keeps saying Druckenmiller instead of Druckenmiller. Could be. So with Druckenmiller now back and strapped in for the ride, we wonder which other prominent investor will promptly follow. And we have this chart looks like the SPDR Gold Trust. Now that's the only gold trust that I would trust, because that's Sprotts, Eric Sprotts. Facebook Inc., Wells Fargo, Halliburton, Freeport, Citigroup, Microsoft, Dow Chemical, JP Morgan Chase, and a slew of others, eBay. Are these all shareholders in Sprotts SPDR Gold Trust? Those are some big names if that's the case. Why are you foolish people buying precious metals? What's wrong with you? Gosh, can't you see anything? Can't you see that paper price being slammed every day through the club and the cartel? The gold cartel? The bankster? Shyster cartel? I guess they don't care. I guess they know something the average person does not know. And I've been trying to scream it for how long? Years. Gold and silver are real money, are real assets, are a real store of wealth. A piece of crap paper that has a number on it, $5, $10, $50, $100. It's the same piece of paper with a different number on it. But we all have faith in that, what it says it means. You know, I read a story the other day recently. I almost thought about doing a video on it, but it wasn't that worthy. But it's worth mentioning. And this lady, I'm talking average American, scraping by to make ends meet, was counterfeiting her own money. Now, naturally, you would expect a person of her skill set being, scraping by. In other words, a completely average American, because most Americans scrape by, and isn't going to have the super knowledge of counterfeiting, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Still used a printer of some sort that did a decent job of creating this paper money, but it was still found, people were finding that they were fakes. Finally, she got reported enough times to where they realized she's the one counterfeiting it, not accidentally getting money somehow, but that was counterfeit. Like, I went to McDonald's and I got change back, and no. And when the feds went back to her house, she had approximately $30,000 printed up, kind of on standby. And when questioned about this, ultimately her answer was that, and this is what made me say, bingo, I'm glad an average person has woken up. She says the Federal Reserve has been doing this all along. The Federal Reserve has been doing this all along. Essentially, you can take this multiple ways. Exhibit A, they're just printing money out of control. So the fact that they're printing so much money, me adding to that money supply with my little amount for me to survive doesn't affect anything, because their amount of they're printing can't even compare to my little piddly stuff. So that's one way you could look at it. The other way is that she's printing paper dollars, and the Federal Reserve's printing paper dollars. It's all pieces of paper. And if it were me, and naturally I'd find myself not guilty, Your Honor, I would request a trial by jury and argue to the jury that the Federal Reserve, the money, even though it says for debts private and public, it is not, and it says legal tender, it is not in fact legal tender, which means I didn't counterfeit real legal tender. And the jury's gonna not ask but wonder, well, why? How is she, what kind of point is she making here? Continue on, my lady. And I would say, if I were her, the 10th Amendment has not been removed from the Constitution, has not been wiped off the face of the earth. It is still on the books as the law. And as you all know, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And by the way, these amendments, such as the 10th Amendment, can in fact be removed. But it takes what is known as a constitutional convention, or from Congress, in order to have a supermajority vote, basically, to either remove or change one of the laws in the Constitution. Congress, realizing that that's damn near impossible, because even though most of them are corrupt, not all of them are corrupt, and they need all of them to be corrupt in order to change something like that, so they don't even bother. They just create new laws that kind of replace those laws, or they say what works with it. And I'll give you an example. Someone filed a lawsuit in the early 1900s, like after I want to say the year was 1918. So we're talking just a few years after the Federal Reserve System was put in place, which was printing paper money then. And someone argued this is not gold and silver money. And I can't remember if it went to the Supreme Court, it may have, or just a federal court. I think it was the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled, actually, it's okay. This money can be used because, but only because, it is backed by gold. It is backed by precious metals. So the backing of this currency is the real money, and that, because of that, we find that this is okay. We rule in favor of the Federal Reserve System staying in place. Now, you know darn well the Supreme Court, or who, was as corrupt then as they are today, because they're handpicked by the executive branch pretty much, and then approved by the other corrupt politicians in Congress, who all have their club members running everything, so that their club members are constantly put in place so that they can continue this charade. So don't feel surprised or look surprised that this happened in 1918. However, they ruled then that because it was backed by gold, it is legal tender. You can use it. In 1971, that went away. Old Nixon removed that. It is no longer backed by gold. Our currency was taken off the gold standard. End of discussion. So, since 1971, you've been using non-constitutional currency. And I would argue this in court if I were this lady. And tell the jury, tell the judge. Mainly the jury, because that's who's going to matter. Because of that, and you can cite case law. So you can say, in such and such versus United States in 1918, the court ruled that paper money is constitutional, but only because it's backed by gold. And our currency since then had been backed by gold until 1971. When President Nixon, via this executive order or whatever, right, you can point to that in court, took us off the gold standard. Our money was no longer backed by gold. At that point in time, since then, you've never used real money by using paper dollars, Federal Reserve notes. Therefore, if I am printing paper Federal Reserve notes, duplicates, if you will, I'm not printing any currency. I'm essentially printing a piece of paper out of my printer. And that's how I would rest my case. Your Honor, I'm done. Of course, you get to mention how much the Federal Reserve has printed, how much the country has printed in just a few years, from 9 trillion to over 18 trillion. You could mention, try to make it to where you can mention that without the damn prosecutor and the lawyer. Objection, hearsay. Objection, that's irrelevant, Your Honor. Objection. Speaking of objections, have any of you watched the Sandy Hook shooting hearings at the local municipality where they brought in Wolfgang Halbig as subpoenaed? The chief of police, the county commissioner people, everybody who mattered that day, to try and determine, not about conspiracy, just who ordered those porta potties, who ordered the flashing sign that said everyone must check in. And the only lady that would have been in charge, and who cleaned up the blood in the biohazard waste, which happens every time there's even if someone dies in their house, the county or whoever's responsible, whoever's jurisdiction, pays for that and handles it. This is the school, so this council, city councilor, would have been responsible. And yet they said, we don't know, we never ordered it. You never ordered this, didn't even... I've checked with every one of the people under me that would be responsible for this, that would report directly to me on this. I was never notified. I wasn't told to do it. We never did it. None of my people did it. That's all I can tell you. Wow. Who do you think brought those out there then? She says, I believe it was the Department of Homeland Security. Busted. Now you know what that Department of Homeland Security has been used for all these years. They're the ones staging some of these false flags activities. Blame it on this guy, blame it on the shooter, blame it on... None of it happened. What do we have after that? Boston Marathon. I urge you to look into some of that video. As I explained the other day. Lady with the purse thing hanging out of her hose hanging out, spraying red blood all over the ground at ground zero of the bombing. And it drips on, like it won't turn off. Her leg is so drenched, you can see in each frame her right leg just being drenched and more drenched and more drenched till it's literally blood red all the way down. When another crisis actor who sees this notices, says, okay, well, she was an uninjured person in this little drill, if you will. Now she has to go to injured, because believe me, they have plan A, plan B. If you get something happens, you have to become an injured person. This is what we're going to do. And they probably lay her down and start putting these fake tourniquets that they just have everywhere, tourniquets everywhere, on her leg, covering up the big area on her leg, of course. And lo and behold, high-resolution photos shows a hose, a little hose, and you can see it clear as day, coming right out of the side of her purse, the one that she's just holding right next to her side the whole time. She will not let go of this purse. You can see the little hose coming out. They were spraying fake blood on the ground. It was a fraud. Like Sandy Hook, the good news, nobody got hurt, nobody died. Anything you heard otherwise is part of the script. What about the double amputee? He was already an amputee. You can see them putting this fake bone leg, because the bone was sticking out, on his leg during the, action live action. And this black lady sitting over his body to cover him up so that the guy behind him is hidden from everybody who's putting it on, who happens to have a hoodie on, sunglasses. You can't tell who this guy is. He's like hidden. Make sure his hoodie's on. Make sure your glasses are on. A bomb just went off. Make sure everything's nice. And she has a white undershirt on that you can see. And this guy's bone leg is like this on her neck when this is happening. So you got pure bone. It hasn't been tied up in a tourniquet yet. It would be squirting blood everywhere. And this lady's white undershirt is completely white before, during the bone on her neck, and after, when she stands up and gives the hand signal, okay, we're ready. No blood. Did you see any of that video in the mainstream media? I bet CNN played that. I bet CNN played and showed you, hey, we found something suspicious here. I bet you, matter of fact, you never even saw that particular clip. But there were people videotaping because it was a Boston Marathon and people were watching and videotaping. And they knew that, so they told themselves, we're going to have it in this area where there's not a lot of cameras that are going to get access here, except for our approved cameramen. Point being, it is the Department of Homeland Security who are the terrorists. And that's all I got to say. Take care.